I received a phone call telling me to back off or else, and I assumed it meant they would harm or kill me. And I don't know where the courage came from, but I said to them, well, I'm not backing off, so I guess it's plan B. And I went to the police with, I think I went to the police with that one. But then my building was spray painted with some forms that I had no idea about. And one of my clients said, those are satanic symbols. And, you know, I know now that shape can provide, well, wellness or illness, you know, health or not health. But I didn't know it back then. But my whole building was sprayed with these symbols. So I called the police again and had them come and investigate. And this young constable came back to me and said, Sandra, you need to know that all your police reports are being prematurely deleted. They're all disappearing.
Really? Wow.
And at that point, I knew that there was really something going on, like that I had no idea about. Hi, my name is Sandra Fecht, and David had asked me to give a little introduction on myself. I was born in England immediately after World War II to two parents, both of whom were veterans in PTSD. So I started dealing with trauma very early in my life through them. And I went to University of Toronto and later on did a master's degree with the Adler Institute of Chicago. That was a wonderful degree and I really loved it. I'm a trainer in neurolinguistic programming, and I've done a variety of energy methods which I found enormously helpful in dealing with the subject matter. I think one of the most important training aspects, though, is the spiritual piece. If you're going to be dealing with ritual and satanic abuse, you need a strong faith. Because there is a spiritual reality out there and you have to be very spiritually grounded. This is not an easy subject. It's hard for people to deal with the initial things that are going on, things like the sacrifices and so on. But the real drama, the real event is in the battle for souls that's going on. And we're not used to that in this society. In our society, if you can't touch it, it's not real, it's not existing. But we have been misled and misdirected. And it's time that we got ourselves back on the path and realized the reality of this. It's your life. And take it seriously. Realize that you're a beautiful spirit being and protect that part of you.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome to this very special show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in and taking the time to join us for this groundbreaking interview today. And I'm here with Sandra and Dave and Fran. All right, and I just want to thank you so much for welcoming into your home and for sharing this story. We're going to be going down some very interesting, thought-provoking, and somewhat dark paths today. But I think that, as I was saying to you before, that this is very important. And Sandra, you being a psychotherapist by trade, doing this for a living, when we talk about addressing trauma and looking down into the, sort of skeletons in the closet, so to speak, a lot of people are afraid to do that, and they turn away from it because they think, oh, well, that's negative. I don't want to look at something that's negative. I don't see the value in doing that, so therefore I'm going to ignore it. But in your experience, that isn't always the best thing to do. It is actually a better thing to confront and face and deal with the trauma. So I hope that's what we're able to accomplish here today, and I want to get your testimony. But maybe just open up with a little bit about yourself, your background, and then we can talk a little bit about your experience in dealing with trauma.
Okay, well, I think the thing that got me into this initially was that I was raised by two veterans from World War II, and both in post-traumatic stress. So I started at a very early age trying to help people who had been through a lot of trauma, because that was the tone in my house. And I went to U of T and started studying psych after I'd had a breakdown because of the way I was raised in that traumatic household setting. And I realized that,
you know, you need to think differently, you need to eat differently, you need to deal with your emotions, that we had different levels of experience that we had to address. And when, so that worked for a while. And always for me, the symptoms are best friends, because they're the things that guide you to say, hey, you know, they're tugging on your sleeve. You need to deal with this. And so I always followed that. You know, whenever I had a symptom, I was like, okay, what's the meaning of this symptom? How is it trying to talk to me? Unresolved trauma will manifest in 100 different symptoms, whether it's emotional or, you know, you get angry, or if it's physical, it'll come out in an illness, a skin disorder, an eating disorder, suicide attempts, breaking the law, sexually acting out, addictions, just numbing out, dissociating. There are 1,000 ways that it can appear if you haven't worked it out. So you have a choice. You know, you either face the trauma or you go through your life carrying all these symptoms. And people do get afraid, because when you have, you know, if you've had a normal life and then you go down into a trauma, there are all these levels of fear and anger and so on that you experience. Then you operate at that new low level of functioning until you come up through those same levels. It's like going to a department store. You know, you've got shoes, linens, camping equipment, and you've got to go through the same floors in order to regain your full potential. And what people have to realize is that when you feel the fear feels real, but it isn't real. It's a memory, it's a flashback, you got through it. You know, in most cases, people are no longer cult involved, but that's not always the case. Sometimes the cult still is contacting them, accessing them. So, but in most cases, they're safe. And we always, I have a method to check and see if they're safe. And if they are, then we can just proceed. And it's like, you know, cut the drama, just deal with this, tell me what you have, and we'll go with it.
It's been so key for me to look at and study what fear is, and also what are the mechanisms that cause us to not face that fear and deal with it, as opposed to running away from it, and how can we bridge that gap. And I'm sure that in your work, and I'd actually like you to talk a little bit about your background as a psychotherapist, you know, maybe a little bit of the history of that, how that came to being for you, and a little bit about the kind of work you do, and then we can get into what has manifested in your work and what you've been talking to some of your clients about, and you know, speaking about trauma. I think that's kind of an understatement, but go ahead a little bit on your background for people.
Okay. When I worked in a training school back in the 70s, and some of the girls there, it was a girls' training school, some of the girls there have been prostituting since they were 9 years old. Now, back in the 70s, we'd never heard of sexual abuse. It just, there was no training in it. It was just not part of the radar. And we just thought they were bad. They were bad girls. We didn't ask, how did they learn about sexuality? How did they learn about prostitution? Who managed them? How did they find contacts? We never asked any of those questions. And, you know, the girls tried to tell us, but we didn't hear. I mean, in the early 70s, I lived in the Northwest Territories, and the native people up there tried to tell me about the residential school experience. And they said, you know, bad things go on here at night. And I thought somebody was cheating at bingo. I mean, I had no idea
what bad really was.
What bad was. And, you know, and I couldn't hear it then because my ears were closed, and I couldn't hear it when I worked in the training school. And in the early 80s, I worked at the mental health center here in Aurelia. And there was a call put out by the Children's Aid Society. They had children that they knew had been molested. And they were looking for therapists who were willing to deal with that. And they required 5 hours a week for 2 years. And a few people from the county, myself and 4 others initially, there were more later, we volunteered, and they brought up somebody called Cindy Blazewski, who is an expert in sexual abuse, and she trained us in how to see these kinds of cases and how to treat them. And I was the only one from the hospital up here who volunteered. So when I went back to the hospital and was looking at the cases I was dealing with there, I realized they've been sexually abused. And it was so, people's lives were so close to it that when I said, I have this case and, you know, she is doing something terrible to her body, particularly her genitals, and I think she's been sexually abused. I mean, honestly, it was as if I had brought a skunk to a picnic. You know, everybody thought it was my filthy mind, that there was no such thing as this, and I took a lot of backlash for that.
Because in that time, like you said, this
Nobody
wasn't a prevalent thing at all. Nobody was dealing with it.
No. And I realized, you know, that it was. And one of the good things about being an immigrant is that you move, and you have to be kind of self-reliant. And so, you know, you either go with the public opinion or your own experience. And I've always gone with my own experience. It's like, okay, if I've seen this before, if I've experienced it, if it's in the literature, I'm going with it. I don't care what anybody else says or does. And so I did. I started investigating sexual abuse, and I worked, after a while I left mental health and I went to work for what was then called the Tamarack and is now called New Path. And I had the best boss in the world, Pat Mullane, and there were 2 or 3 of us there who had taken the training with Cindy, and I felt that we stood back to back, you know, facing all the other therapists in what I call the therapy wars of the 80s, because there were people who thought sexual abuse had happened, people who thought it hadn't happened, and within that small group who knew it had happened, there were those of us who thought we shouldn't deal with it because it just creates more problems, and those of us who thought we have to deal with it, that's our job.
Right.
And I was in that latter group. And so I started spending a lot of time and money learning methodology and putting things together to develop a process that would enable people to find their truth in an easy, gentle fashion. And so that's what I did. And in the process of doing that, people started to tell me other things, like really strange things involving chanting and hoods and child sacrifice. My first thought on this was, you're crazy and you need more antipsychotic medication. In fact, the first person who started telling me about lizards, it was his very first regression. You know, close your eyes, get into that alpha brainwave state. And the first thing he said, well, there are all these creatures walking around. They look like lizards or alligators or something. And never having heard of this, I said to him, quit avoiding and get on with the real thing. You know, because I didn't know about this.
It could have been maybe like a screen memory or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I didn't follow that at the time. Anyway, as I said to you, if you've heard it before several times, or it's part of your own experience, or you've read about it, then you've got to believe it's true. And I hadn't heard it before, hadn't read about it, and so on. But I started hearing about it a few more times with other people, all these strange things. And I went to my hairdressers. You know, women talk at their hairdressers. Therapists, or hairdressers should have a therapy degree.
They should. It's true.
Yeah, they hear everything.
Yeah.
I said, you know, I'm hearing all these weird things. I don't know what's going on. And she said to me, have you ever heard of David Icke? And I said, no, I haven't. She said, well, read The World's Biggest Secret. So I got that book. And
sorry to interrupt, but this was back in the time frame.
Early 90s, I think.
90s,
yeah, somewhere in that
so
time
when you
frame.
started writing more too, yeah. So.
Yeah. And I read the book, and I got to the chapter on lizards, and I thought, this is crazy. And I put it down. And I told a client, that David Icke guy, he has it straight in terms of all the cult abuse. He outlined it all. It's perfect. First I thought it was just going on here, in Simcoe County, but apparently it's going on all over the world. And, but the lizard thing, I just can't agree with. And she looked at me and she said, "Don't you remember me telling you about that?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, I did." And I had no recollection. It was just outside of anything I could understand.
It's like maybe when you first heard it, your own mind was blocking that. Because I guess that's how the mind works. At first, we edit everything, right?
Yeah.
We edit our reality, we edit our experience. And so when you first hear something that's completely foreign, it's just like, and I know because I do it too. Everybody is victim to this, right? So so how did you then come back around and start to really look into this more and think there was something to it?
Well, what I thought was, there are a couple of things that happened. As far as the lizard part, I thought I have to really pay attention here and force myself to transcend this block. And so I really started to listen when people started talking about it. And how's that for a good tool for a therapist, that you listen? Why don't they teach that?
Therapy 101 for all the hairdressers out there.
The second thing that happened is that I was dealing with one client, and by then I knew enough to not speak of it. This was a long time ago, and it wasn't safe to be talking about this. And I had a client, and she gave a list of people who were active in a cult that was here in Aurelia back in the 50s and 60s. And so I said, if anything ever happened to you, we'd need to know where to start looking. Let's walk this list down to the local police station, which we did. And said, you need to file this. And we made a report because she was talking about what had happened to her. And I asked her to be quiet about it because I knew it might not be safe. Well, she wasn't, and it wasn't safe. And I received a phone call telling me to back off or else. And I assumed it meant they would harm or kill me. And I don't know where the courage came from. But I said to them, well, I'm not backing off, so I guess it's plan B. And I went to the police with that one. But then my building was spray painted with some forms that I had no idea about. And one of my clients said, those are satanic symbols. And, I know now that shape can provide wellness or illness, health or not health. But I didn't know it back then. But my whole building was sprayed with these symbols. So I called the police again and had them come and investigate. And this young constable came back to me and said, "Sandra, you need to know that all your police reports are being prematurely deleted. They're all disappearing."
Really? Wow.
And at that point, I knew that there was really something going on, that I had no idea about.
Okay, and we're back. All right, so Sandra, I'm just going to focus on you for a little bit here, and then I want to get to Dave and Fran as well. But you found out that someone within the police department, a constable, had said that pretty much your files and your reports were being deleted. Mm-hmm. Did he mention anything beyond that as to, maybe you should be careful, or there's higher, something going on within the police here? Did you get that feeling right away that this wasn't just some small group, that there was something going on with blocking an actual investigation within the police department, or?
Well, I think he was brave to tell me that much to begin with, and I thank him for that. At the time, I think I was in such shock that would be happening. Later, I put it together of just how incredibly organized this is. It's like this giant underground connection, and you don't know who belongs to it and who doesn't. And evidence disappears all the time. I had somebody call me up
from Base Borden, and he had been part of something there. I can't remember what it was. I was a little afraid to go and meet with him because he said, you're dealing with satanic abuse, right? And I said, yeah, but at that point I dipped my toe in the water, but really didn't know anything about it. And I met him for lunch, and he said it goes on at the base all the time. And I said, well, where's the evidence? And he said, we have to turn in any evidence, and eventually as it gets passed along, that evidence disappears. And I think that happens in a lot of cases, you know, where it's really hard to get evidence about this. But there's a huge network. I think the Masons being a case in point. And not everybody in the Masons is into the dark side of things, but I know there is a stream of people in the Masons who are, and the good guys have no idea that the other side is there.
It's so compartmentalized, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in the Middle Ages, the Masons flew two standards, the dark and the light, and they walked both paths, you know. So I don't know exactly what those paths entail, but I would assume that one gets better and better the higher they go towards their 33rd degree, and the other gets worse and worse. And it's all about dealing in power and unseen power.
Ancient knowledge that has been blocked from our view now. Like a lot of people are completely unfamiliar with this in our day. We're so absorbed in television world and, you know, is the mall open and working our jobs and paying our taxes and trying to be good, productive citizens and all this and obeying the, you know, innumerable amount of laws that are put up for everybody to follow every day. But when there's something going on in the undercurrent behind world events, behind local events, or behind events in just individuals' lives, which is where you came in, to peer into that takes a lot of courage. And it definitely, over the years, I'm sure your own sanity and your own reason and courage has been probably tested by choosing to go down this road. Have you found it to be kind of a lonely path to seek this out, or do you find support?
Yeah, I think all my friends are in this room.
Wow.
I'm just kidding, but kind of not. It's very lonely. People step back from you. I can clear a room, you know, if I start talking about this. I remember one time being at a birthday party for a friend, and she had a friend who was one of the top people, a therapist at CAMH. And I said, I know you're probably, we're standing around with our drinks, you know. I know you're probably dealing with sexual abuse now at CAMH. Pardon me. But are you dealing with ritual or satanic abuse? And literally she looked at me, her eyes widened, and she sidled away from me until she was 180 degrees, like as far away in the room as she could get from me. And she's a therapist, and a leading therapist at one of the leading institutions in Canada. It's a very lonely walk. People marginalize you. They label you. You know, people think that I'm really like odd, crazy, what a silly thing to spend my life doing. But firstly, I'm a therapist, and I figure if people need help, I'm going to give it to them. And secondly, I can't follow my colleagues at the expense of my clients. You know, I have very few colleagues who believe the way I do. There is a group that believes in satanic abuse, but a lot of that group does not believe that there's any real spiritual power behind it, that there's no such thing as heavy energy or dark energy that's taking over people and all these things. And I don't get into that to frighten people or make anybody uncomfortable. I get into it because I believe in the beauty of each person and in what is really in there, their soul. I think it's a battle for souls, and it's up to each one of us to transcend and to do David Hawkins' level of consciousness and to go from shame and fear and anger up into peace, love, and joy. And I know it's attainable, and I know I can help people to get there. And that's my job. It's not worrying about what anybody else thinks about me. So that's
Well,
why I want
that
to do
is
it.
very commendable, Sandra. And I just got to say, like, I want to commend and thank you for your bravery and A, doing this interview and coming forward, and B, doing the work you do with your clients, because it is valuable. And I'm sure there are many other therapists out there, maybe somebody even watching this video, that is having clients come to them with these type or similar experiences. And because we were talking before, there's no category for this within the training of
Absolutely.
psychologists, psychiatrists, and therapists. So how do you deal with that, being that you've got sort of the regular formal training that all the other therapists would go through, but now you've been handed this other piece to deal with? How do you deal with that when you're dealing with a client? How have you created almost like a framework to operate from?
Good question. Firstly, I'd like you to know that I would love to do workshops and training programs for other therapists just to open their eyes and show them what to look for. I tried to do that last year at the Toronto Energy Psychology Conference where I was speaking. And honestly, I think it polarized the room.
Really?
Yes, because there was somebody in the back corner saying, we shouldn't even talk about this because it only makes the problem worse. All the same stuff we heard about sexual abuse in the therapy wars of the 80s. And someone else in the back corner saying, she's right, I can't talk about it. I have a legal case that's ongoing right now, but she's right. And now you're going to have to remind me of you're wanting about the format that I use.
Yeah, how would
Okay.
you, I guess you've developed your own format.
Oh, yeah,
You've had
absolutely.
to, right?
Well, the first thing when anybody comes in, you have to see what their problem is and deal with their particular problem. Build rapport, all the things that are usual in therapy. I call it therapy land. And one of the tools I always use is Enneagram. It's a personality scale, which I totally love. And it helps to keep their conscious mind busy while they're learning and growing, because most people only recognize their conscious mind. They don't recognize the unconscious. And of course, the more unconscious something is, the more power it has.
Yeah, that's true.
And so you've got to shine light on that unconscious part. So the next thing I introduce them to is energy work. And there are many different layers of energetics, and I realize how much there is to learn in this field. There's your overall aura and all the layers. There's an assemblage point that we're just trying to put together a treatment program for. There are chakras, there are energy lines, meridians, and every one of those is necessary for really good health and happiness and so on. And I teach clients how to balance their energy field, because when your energy field is balanced, then your body's healthy, your mind is happy and calm, you think straight, your emotions are balanced. And if they have some control over that, then when I start teaching them to go into a mild self-hypnosis, into an alpha brainwave state, if they start to get afraid, I can say to them, well, you know what to do if you start to feel afraid, so do that particular method on yourself. And it's about keeping them totally in control and not regressing them enough so that they have no control over the present moment, but that they can dip their foot into the unconscious. And if they want, they can go further, and if they don't want, they can pull out of it. And I make sure they're still oriented in present time, as well as following all the cues, whether they're visual, auditory, kinesthetic, emotional, whether it involves smell or taste. Follow the cues that your unconscious is giving, because the unconscious will leave a little breadcrumb trail, and if you follow it, you'll get the real meal deal, And so I work it that way.
How do you address a lot of the issues people have with hypnosis as a method? And I know I'm sure you use multiple methods, but this comes up a lot, especially with this subject matter, where the debunkers or whoever is trying to discredit this idea, they say, well, hypnosis is basically leading the witness, so therefore we're just creating fantasies and you're encouraging fantasies within your patients. How would you address that type of, statement or idea?
Well, firstly, for the detractors, what do they call that? That group, the repressed memory group. What do they call that?
Oh, the false memory
False
syndrome
memory
society,
syndrome.
False memory syndrome.
Yeah.
which is a false label.
Yes. And if you followed any of Professor Jennifer Freyd's work, do you know her work?
No, I haven't heard of it.
Well, she's the one who started having some, realizing that maybe she needed some help and was sexually abused. And went to a licensed psychologist in the States, Jennifer Freyd, F-R-E-Y-D. And she went to a licensed psychologist. After a couple of sessions, she started having spontaneous memory about her dad molesting her. And so she went and confronted him privately. And he vehemently denied it. And he was a very wealthy man. And I wonder, I have no evidence of this, but it's crossed my mind that maybe her dad was connected in some way. I don't know that, but I've questioned it myself, because he put a lot of money into supporting the idea that any accusation about sexual abuse was false. And he put tracts in libraries everywhere. In Barrie, just south of here, there are tracts that say, this is all false, this didn't happen to you. He even sent out representatives to discredit any accusations of sexual abuse in court cases. There was one fellow from that organization who came up here to Simcoe County when Cindy Blazewski was here, and he went home defeated. She knew her stuff, and he was later fired, this guy, for extolling the virtues of man-boy love in a Dutch pedophile magazine, so that's how credible that organization is.
Wow.
But it really discredited a lot of good work for a lot of time. And Jennifer Freyd is now doing some wonderful work on betrayal trauma, when people, like therapists or the community, deny what's happening to people. The second part, for me, was, you're going to have to repeat your question there, Dave.
Well, just regarding how you're explaining it very well, actually, just how this is denied, and they use a cop-out mechanism, which is, hypnotherapy or hypnosis or any of that is really just a way of helping to encourage the client to go on this fantasy or whatever. You know how they put it in those terms, right? They try to write it off.
They do try to write it off. Well, I think it depends on the skill of the hypnotherapist. And you don't ask leading questions. You don't ask questions like, tell me about the spotted giraffe that you've just seen. Everybody's going to go looking for a spotted giraffe. The thing is, once you get somebody into that nice, relaxed alpha state, you just keep saying, and then what happens? And then what happens? Or what are you aware of? Tell me what you're aware of. And I had one client say, well, I'm seeing bubbles. Great, now I have a lead. Tell me about the bubbles. Well, there's a bar of soap. Okay, tell me about the soap. Well, I'm in the bathtub. Okay, tell me about what's happening in the bathtub. My dad is there. And then it just goes from there.
Do you see in that state that there is emotional reactions in that moment, or do you find they're very, they just keep talking in a straightforward manner and then it hits later?
It depends on the client. And I've had people that, what I generally ask them to do is to just hold the emotion for now. I want a memory with a side of emotion, not the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because if I can get the information, the facts first, and then make a container with the facts, that holds the emotion. If people start emoting all over the place and they don't understand why they're emoting, they look really odd, really crazy. But if they have the facts, if you know this, and this has happened, then when the emotion comes out, it makes sense, and when you pair that emotion with the event, the whole thing retreats and the symptoms all go away. So that's the way I like to do it. I have other colleagues, Sheila Petrochenko in Barrie, who's a physiotherapist, and she's much better at getting the emotion out than I am. And so once we have the facts, And I use a method called muscle testing in order to understand what the individual client's energetic field would most benefit from by way of healing. But if it says send them to Sheila, I send them to Sheila, or send them to Deepalm, the massage therapist I use, then I send them there. Send them to Robert, the osteopath in Toronto, then I suggest they go there. You know, muscle testing is a really great method. You know, it's also part of my protocol, which I didn't mention earlier, but it's kind of pivotal. And I would never, ever recommend that anybody enters into this work without a firm faith of some sort. And for me, as a Christian, that's what I use. Because it really is a battle between energies in the end. The Bible says that, you know.
And it's funny because I've done a lot of comparative religious work and study and looking into the ancient past, the myths, the legends, the scriptures. What these stories have been replete throughout all of ancient society. You know, you've got the Gnostics talking about the archons, the archontic force. You've got the you know, if you come from the more Middle Eastern Sumerian idea, they talk about Anunnaki. They talk about the jinn. They talk about these. You know, in Christianity, it's demonology. In Zimbabwe, it could be something else. You know, like wherever you go. Even I'm not sure if you're familiar with Credo Mutwa.
No.
He was one of the shaman that David Icke actually interviewed. I've also worked with Michael Tellinger, who's also interviewed Credo. And Credo Mutwa is a wisdom keeper from South Africa. He's one of the last Sunni elders who has the history of South Africa. And he was one of the first interviews that David Icke did to talk specifically about the reptilian lizard type aspect. And in their culture, they call them the Chitahuri. And they have a very detailed accounting of interactions with these beings. It's as if you're talking about, I just met, you know, Jake the other day up the road at the gas station. They're like, yep, had another experience with the Chitahuri. Like, it's very common. So this is what I'm trying to bring in here, is this idea that this isn't just a new phenomenon.
No.
And also ritualistic abuse, especially of children, is absolutely not new under the sun. This is something that is as historic as civilization. So it's interesting that in the modern time, we're still scoffing at all these ideas. Everybody wants to write all those stories off as just myth and legend and fairy tale. They want to include the ritualistic abuse side of it, especially when it pertains to the natives, the Aboriginals. They don't want to hear what they have to say about it. You brought up the residential schools. All of this is collectively repressed. It's and if I've studied a lot of Carl Jung's work when he's talking about repressing this type of you know, not facing the shadow self or doing that shadow work or the subconscious. Individually it happens, but would you agree that collectively that's what's happening as well? Collectively, especially here in the West, we're very much repressing a truth here that does need to be addressed.
Well, 100%. I agree with that. I've, you know, been in some other parts of the world and been in Asia and seen a black temple. And I asked somebody, well, what's that about? And they said, oh, they do bad things there. You know, I know that all over the world, they know that this stuff is going on. And what it means is that people there have a choice and they know to protect themselves spiritually and so on. We don't. You know, in the Bible, I remember as a child, I was always trying to find wisdom. That was my goal from the time I was small. And when I was like 8 or 9 years old reading the Bible, and it said, parents, don't eat your children. And I remember thinking...
We actually have to clarify that?
Yeah, right.
That's a rule?
Phew.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, why would anybody say that?
Yeah.
You know? And that's what it's about. We have our eyes closed, you know, from the 4th century when there was some edict made that anything about this type of thing would be taken out of Scripture. Unfortunately, those that should be leading us into truth have been leading us away from truth in order to gain control. And the Bible and other manuscripts, they've had all the important parts about frequency and energy control and so on taken out, but it can now be found in the Nag Hammadi and Coptic Bible and, you know, the Gnostic Bible and other parts. Like, the information is coming to light now. And there are still little threads of it in the Bible, because I remember tripping over things as a child and thinking, what does this have to do with anything? I remember one part, I think it's in Leviticus, where it says, don't wear cloth of mixed fiber. Now, what's that got to do with salvation and truth and all of that? Well, everything has a frequency, and flax has a frequency, silk has a frequency, cotton has a frequency, wool. And if you wear cloth of mixed fiber, which everybody does these days, the frequencies get all messed up. So, the truth is still there, but you really have to look for it. And this sense of we don't have the right to access the information on our energetic field in the Western culture. In other cultures, it's still there, thank goodness, was reinforced during the witch burnings. And in witch craze, I think the estimate was between 3 and 9 million women were killed for knowing this kind of information. All the old crones who would walk about from village to village healing people. If you healed somebody, you were picked up and put through the Inquisition test. If they tried to drown you and you drowned, well, then you were okay. If you lived, well, obviously you were a witch and you had to be burned to death. And if you made a mistake, leave it up to God to sort it out. It was pure insanity, primitive control. We're being controlled in much more sophisticated ways now. And one is with professional and personal censure. If you know a lot about energetic fields, at one point that was considered witchcraft. I actually have been called a witch because I balanced energy fields. And that was way back in the 80s or so. But, if you get Cindy Dale's book, The Subtle Body, or look at Donna Eden's work, they have huge, thick books that describe all of this wonderfully. I have a little thin one, that just gives the very basics of it. But just as we need to be responsible for the health of our bodies through exercise, food, cleanliness, and the health of our mind and the health of our emotions, we have to be responsible for the health of our energetic field, because that is where the real attack takes place. Somebody can control your frequencies, they can control everything about you. And that is where it's really happening. And the technology that certain areas of our society have is, I've heard it expressed that it's 1,000 years ahead of what any of us really knows.
It's incredible. And as you're talking, it just reminded me of a quote that's been with me for a long time. And that is that if you don't control your own mind, someone else will. And I think when we talk about mind control, and we talk about whether it's on a social level through the media or through propaganda, or whether it's more deeply rooted into what we're discussing today, which is satanic abuse and whatnot. It's setting you up in a position where you're vulnerable to having someone else dictate your experience here. Whereas if you're truly living in your organic sovereign state, then you have control of those faculties and you can use them to do the work you're here to do. But when someone comes in and hijacks that, I personally can't think of something more criminal. When someone comes in and tries to influence your mind in a way where you're now deviated from your natural state of being, and you're now following an agenda of somebody else. Now, the question could be, do we blame the perpetrators for that because they exist? Or do we blame the subject for that because, some people believe that subconsciously people choose to have other people control their mind for them? What do you think about that concept, and especially the work you do, talking about that control?
I think we're controlled almost on every level. If you look at Dr. Mark Hyman's book, The Ultimate Mind Solution and The Ultimate Body Solution, he has several books, he talks about the role of diet and what it does to us. And there are 3 or 4 major corporations that are putting out all of the products that are on the interior aisles of the grocery store. It looks as if we have choice, but we don't. And what Mark Hyman says is there are some 80,000 combinations of chemicals, if you eat the typical North American diet, that you ingest every year. And if you eat a fruit and vegetable diet, you get up to a gallon of neurotoxin a year because of fertilizers and pesticides. And the best way to go is organic. Well, when we eat that kind of diet, we are so dumbed and numbed down that we can't think straight. We're not in control of ourselves. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
The media, the entertainment, the education system, and so on.
And the media is centrally controlled in that same way.
Yes,
4 or 5
absolutely.
corporations running. You think you have choice on television
No.
or magazines or movies? That it's all the same crowd.
And so this is just, what we now accept as normal. What we haven't accepted as normal is that there are organizations and groups out there that are deliberately mind-controlling people to do things that are basically unspeakable. To torture, to sacrifice. I mean, if you know the history of Operation Paperclip and MK Ultra, which I'm sure you do, that the Nazi torturers who so exquisitely documented and detailed how to torture, a man of this weight, this age, this health, you put him in ice water for this long, and then after this amount of time, he'll die. And that was all documented, and all of these evil people were not consequenced after the war. Under Operation Paperclip, they were brought to the United States and given false identities and asked to teach the American authorities how to do this. And under MK Ultra, they say that up to 2 million people, Americans and some Canadians, were put through mind control. Now, that is the less known, the more targeted information. But I've had clients where, they were controlled or accessed when somebody would say a word and then touch a spot on their back, and they would instantly be put into an altered state of consciousness where anything could be done to them.
Wow.
And so what we do is muscle test and find out, how they're accessed, how they're controlled. And I had one client who, we realized that he was being accessed and still controlled. And we found the spot on his back that influenced him, and we diffused it. And the next time somebody shook his hand and tried to touch his back, and it didn't work, and they moved their hand and touched another spot, and they moved their hand and touched another spot, and he waited until they touched 4 or 5 spots, and then he looked at them and said, "You can stop trying to find it now." Yeah, there are, these 2-level signals that will put you into that mind-controlled state. I've had beautiful, ordinary housewives look at me and say, "I know that I have been mind-controlled to kill on a certain signal, a frequency signal." So there are, and I've had several of those, from my little office here. I've had several of those reports, and I've had reports of people being mind-controlled to operate weaponry that consciously they've never had any information on.
Really?
Yeah. And things like where somebody will say, "Oh, I'm really itchy." Like they start out in their regression. I mean, I couldn't possibly dream this stuff up. I'm itchy. Oh, it's the cloak that I'm wearing. Well, tell me, what's happening with the cloak? Where are you? And they're in some Middle Eastern country learning how to operate weaponry, and to their conscious knowledge, they've never been there. So it begs the question, well, how did they get there? And so on. And I mean, did they disappear for a week and the parents just let them go? Or was there some high technology that was used to transport them there? And I know this defies credibility, but what you have to accept is that the government is so much further ahead in technology than what we're aware of, for one thing. And the second thing is, if you keep hearing the stories, you have to believe it. And I keep hearing the stories. I can't prove that that's going on out there, but I keep hearing the stories. And when I acknowledge this reality for my clients, they get better. They're not living in fear. They're free to find themselves, offer to society what they have to offer, instead of costing us billions of dollars, either through jail terms, hospitalization, underutilization of their own ability, welfare, whatever other expenses are incurred when somebody's living in fear and restriction. So
it's it's truly shocking, and I think when we really dig into this and see that this is a lot more prevalent than maybe people would be aware of, or would really want to be aware of. Speaking of that, would you give a guess as to how many clients roughly over the years you've had on either of the fronts of satanic ritualistic abuse, or talking more about more what would be considered paranormal type of experiences, or recounts of mind control type things?
Well, I would really be hard-pressed to say how many people I've seen on this, but it would be hundreds. And I remember once talking to a Native woman in the States. God bless her, she passed recently. And I said to her, I figure about 1 in 3 people has been through this kind of cult, satanic, mind-controlled experience. And with that kind of groundedness that you see in some Native people who are just really solid and in touch with themselves, which is something we are, as Westerners, for the most part, we're not. She looked at me and she said, your numbers are too low. So in her experience, she was a therapist. In her experience, the numbers were much higher than 1 in 3. The problem is we don't know. We don't know why we have mood disorders, or why we're acting out sexually, or why we're drinking. We don't know. And when you get to the bottom of it, I mean, sometimes it's a more simple thing, but oftentimes it's a very deep thing. And therapists need to be trained to have eyes to see this and ears to hear it. That's where I think the impulse needs to take place now, is in training people to be aware of this stuff, so that when the clients start giving clues that even the clients don't know what they're saying, that you can, be aware that, oh my gosh, something is going on here. They don't realize what they're telling me.
Right. And like you said, it's going to take a lot of courage for people to get to that level where they, like, especially in your field, where first of all they can admit that this is something that needs to be addressed, that it's not just a bunch of fantasy, that these people are recounting real experiences to them. And maybe just quickly to explain for people some of the ways that you have this information coming from people to speak to the fact that this isn't something that is being created for them. This isn't something that they have anything to gain by lying to you or creating a fantasy. In fact, it's always furthest from that. It's clear. Like, what would be some more of the, evidence of the fact that this is a legitimate trauma that they've actually experienced?
Okay, evidence of legitimate trauma. I think the convincers have to come from the individual. And I have one client who we would start talking, well, not we, he would start telling me they're burning my feet. And his feet would break out in blisters. And he'd have to crawl out of here. Like, his body would...
Recreated it.
Absolutely. And he'd lie on the couch in the waiting room for 2 or 3 hours until the blisters disappeared so he could drive home. And he would go through any number of experiences of that sort. In other cases, they've had family members who confirmed what they were saying. In one case, I had a client who, years ago, when, it was so tentative and we didn't really understand it, or like I just was gathering the information at that point. And we're both, at the end of each session kind of scratching our heads and going, well, what was that about? I don't know. Anyway, it was all about cloaks and torture and sacrifice and killing people and making portals to manifest entities and so on. And, we're sort of going along, yeah, that's what you're reporting. And then he was left a trunk of all the paraphernalia that was used in the rituals.
This is the patient.
The patient was, yeah. Like, he had no conscious recollection of any of it, but when the relative died, the one who had been molesting him and hurting him, and he was left this trunk with all of this stuff in it, he phoned me up and said, Sandra, it's all true. I've been left this trunk. Don't ever call me again.
Wow.
You know, it's kind of like finding out that, as one of my sons said, it's like finding out that your wife is sleeping with your best friend. Sometimes you just don't want to know.
Yeah.
You don't want to deal with it.
Especially when it was done at such a young age for him and then brought back. That must have brought back.
Triggered him.
Triggered it, yeah.
And all we want to do in doing therapy with people who have been through this, it's not for the glamour or the cheap thrill of listening to all these horrific stories. I've heard more than enough horrific stories in my time. I just want to get them back to that peace, love, joy place where they really belong. You know, and the trouble with proving any of this, is that there are so many people at higher levels of society who can scuttle the information. You know, it's really difficult. I've had clients come back to me and say, Sandra, you need to know that, you know, I go to this club in Barrie where all of this S&M stuff is taking place, and she said everybody's there. There are ministers and judges and teachers and housewives, everybody. And I said, well, where is this place? And the person looked at me and said, honestly, if I told you, we would both be killed.
Wow.
So, you know, there's so much cover-up of this. Not in other countries, but in our country. Our countries, our Western world. The other thing is that those cults are hugely skilled in terms of confusing people so that they look crazy. There's sort of a 4-point reference where they say it happened when it did happen, or they say something happened when it didn't happen, or they say it didn't happen when it did, or it didn't happen when it didn't. So you're never quite sure where the truth is. And I've heard stories of where a cult has hypnotized a child, given them some kind of thing to give them cramps of some sort, taken a baby, seemingly from between their legs, told them that they've given birth to this child. And so the child goes around saying, well, I had a baby when I was 5, because in their reality, that appeared to have happened. Of course it didn't. So when the child would say, well, they've buried somebody in the backyard, oh, there she goes, telling stories again. You know,
You set up a smoke screen.
Absolutely.
And you also brought in, I'm kind of honestly not sure if we recorded this or not, but you were talking about the Masonic connection.
We did
And
record it.
we did. And did you have any more sort of experiential information on that, on the connection between some of these Masonic fraternities and these satanic groups? Are they one and the same? Are they different fronts for something bigger? What do you think?
Well, I think the answer to both questions is yes, that there are, as I said, not all Masons who gather to perform these types of rituals, and one of the tests is bring in your 5-year-old daughter for the use of your fellow Masons. You know, this kind of thing. And are they connected to other clubs and echelons? I think there are feeder clubs that, you know, the higher and higher and higher you go. Yeah. So that the people at the bottom, there's lots of them, and then there's a few at the top. And
that's why they have these initiate rites where you get a little bit more information as you go, and each level thinks they know more than the next, but really you've got a pyramidal structure here, like the military, where it's very compartmentalized, and no one really has the full picture. They all just have their little tiny piece, and
exactly.
That's it, right?
Yeah. And I'm just trying to put this together, and it was like putting together an image made out of wet tissue paper for the longest time. It was really, really difficult. But now I think I've got, I mean, as far as I have the picture, I've got a pretty good picture. And again, what I'm realizing is it's mandatory for us to, listen, no matter how crazy these stories sound, because there are thousands upon thousands of people out there that have been through this. And again, it's costing us a fortune as a society not to pay attention to that. I lost my train of thought there, David.
That's actually a good way to sum it up. That it's a fortune of our fellow men, like you said, not having them operating from that place of their true, authentic self. They're living in a suppressed, traumatic state, and that is seeping into everywhere else in our society. And because of how prevalent this type of this type of fear-based trauma is in the media and everywhere else, everybody is getting a little dose of it, and some people just get direct experience, and it can be a lot more traumatic than maybe everybody would experience. But either way, I think we're all suffering from a form of trauma-based mind control, one level or another.
Well, we're all told we're not good enough.
Right.
You know, we're not pretty enough, we're not smart enough, we don't earn enough money, we don't have the right clothes, instead of valuing who we are.
Yeah.
You know, just enjoying the fact that you're Fred or Sally or whoever you are, just really rejoicing in that and enjoying the experience. It's temporary, you know, have fun with it.
And how much could we accomplish as a modern society and as a community and as families? How much could we accomplish if we weren't so hampered by all these blockages and this oppositional force that's there? That's, you know, we honestly don't have to live. I don't believe this is the natural state of things. I don't believe that, oh, there's good and there's evil, and without evil there wouldn't be any good and all that. I believe that honestly we have the ability to create whatever kind of world, you know, whatever kind of life we want, but it does have to do with addressing the trauma. It does have to do with
Absolutely.
really looking at this honestly. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate the work you're doing and coming forward. And I kind of want to shift this conversation over to Dave. And speaking of, you know, experience, Dave, you've grown up in a satanic family and having experiences of your own. And maybe you just share what you feel comfortable with in terms of your background, and we can get into your story a little bit.
Well, I didn't have any idea of what I experienced until I was 53 years old and met Sandra. As an adult, I had an immense anger always quick to be angry. I never knew where that anger came from, and that's what brought me to Sandra, because it was disruptive in my marriage naturally. I wasn't as I should have been with my wife, so that's why I came. And so very, very shortly I started having these body memories. And I would just like to point out that body memories are referred to in the book The Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton, where he states that every cell in our body is an entity unto itself, and each has its own brain. So you can access these memories very easily. And the word hypnosis, as Sandra referred to them, like self-hypnosis, to me seems like a bit of a misnomer, because it's basically just shutting your eyes and concentrating on the age and who else was with you at that time, because the Christ consciousness or God or whoever will bring that memory to you, and that's how it happened for me. And so it's retrieving memories in a different way than we're used to. And it takes some while to be comfortable with them, because of course they are often of events they're always of events you didn't know about, and they're often not nice to bring up. So at that time the first memory started of being sexually abused by relatives, and I had no idea that I was sexually abused. And then the first memory that kind of indicated Satanism to Sandra, but not to me, because of course I had no idea about Satanism at that time. She didn't talk about Satanism. We were just...
And it was just kind of a label, really.
Well, I didn't even I probably heard of the word, but that was about it. Mm. But I was, one of my relatives, who was the cult leader, had me kill small animals with a knife by stabbing them in the neck in his little room in his basement. And so then I started having more memories of that nature. And then I started having memories of cult events where they, at a very young age, where they try to assess your attributes, your courage, your compassion, your will. And although I don't have memories of this, I assume also any spiritual gifts you may have, so that, because the cult wants to know that, because they can use them in the future. Mm. And then I have the next step was of events designed to initiate me into the cult. And initiation into the cult I was born into was to kill a human being by stabbing him through the heart with a knife. And they would devise events to manipulate me at 3 and 4 to do that act. But I wouldn't do it. For some reason, I wouldn't do it, and I think I got help from above to help keep me not from doing it. But it was very stressful for everybody there, including me, because when I didn't do it, when I wouldn't kill, I would refuse adamantly. It made me mad to think about hurting someone else like that. But it made them mad because I didn't want to become one of them. And of course it embarrassed my dad, who was only maybe 24, 25, and embarrassed my grandpa also because he was the leader of the cult. And I wasn't going to become one of them. And so they attempted to have me do this for, I have many memories, 3, 4, and 5. And finally they gave up, and he said in the memory, we must destroy him. If we don't destroy him, someday surely he will destroy us. And to destroy me meant to take away all my God-given gifts and attributes, my courage. It took my courage, my self-esteem, my self-confidence, my ability to get along with others, being able to love myself, self-esteem. It took everything away and turned me into something else. So I grew up, and even in my adult years, thinking I was a coward, angry, no self-esteem, no self-confidence, unable to interact socially with others. Many more things also that I can't even remember right now because I've written them down, all these things that brought out of me. So when I started seeing Sandra, like these memories, I had trouble accepting them for a long time. But of course, each one of those memories put a block inside of me, hiding my essence. And with Sandra, I learned many of her healing methods. I worked every day on this from the time I found out what happened to me. In 2008, I discovered that it took about 7 months maybe to discover that my family of origin was complicit in all the crimes committed against me. So that was from childhood right till I was 53 years old. And that immediately put me in a state of fear because it triggered all the mind control fear programs that I had been programmed with since I was a little boy. And the day I found out about that was having lunch with my brother, and my wife and I both knew by his body language, his attitude, and the words he spoke that my family was complicit. He finally gave up. I was meeting him to update him on all I had been learning because, first of all, I told him about my grandpa and my uncles. And so they knew I was getting to them, but I hadn't yet got there. Because, of course, I probably wasn't ready. The memory wasn't ready to come because I wasn't ready emotionally to handle the fact that those I loved and thought loved me hated me and held me in contempt and disgust and subjected me to these acts my whole life. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Father's Day, Mother's Day, birthdays, family events. I was drugged, and often my family. And we were subjected to these horrific acts. And often I was taken elsewhere at these times where they could take me to their place where they had the tools of the trade and where they wouldn't be interrupted. The day after I discovered what happened to me, I went to see a lawyer to tell her all this, a friend I knew. And as I was coming out of the lawyer's office, like I was in a state of shock, I was discombobulated, fear. And I saw my car was parked down the road on the left, and right in front of me was parked a brand new Silverado 4-door pickup truck, and I think it was blue, and the doors were open. And I saw 2 guys walking back from the direction of my car, looking at me intently, and one of them was carrying a very heavy object with a blanket wrapped around it. That registered in my consciousness somehow, but I paid no attention to it because I had my own problems, Well, an hour later, I discovered on my car a huge dent on the top of the fender. It couldn't have been caused by another vehicle because it's on the very top. And so my mind immediately flashed towards those 2 guys. And it made my head swim to think of how quickly the cult, because my brother lived 2.5 hours from there. And this happened the next morning at 8, before noon. Then in 2010, as I got stronger, as I removed those blocks that were put in me, my courage started to come forth courage I have, I guess, whatever amount that is. And I started to confront some of the people I knew in the town I lived in at that time, of the times I'd been drugged and been subjected to their perverted sexual acts and other acts of humiliation and degradation. So in 2010, they stole and burnt a brand new car of mine in an attempt to intimidate me. And so since that time, I have been dedicating myself to trying to shine the light of truth on Satanism and what happened to me, so that other people can be aware for their children and for themselves. Because I didn't know any of this until I was 53. And, that my family's been affected, because, of course, at those family events, they were there too, so they also got drugged. Right. And
was the drugging aspect of it, I guess, and even Sandra, you can comment on this, was that what was used as a way of screening these memories? Was it more the trauma that was used to screen the memories, or?
Well, as an adult, like betrayal trauma as a little child is trauma that I think a definition would be that a child can't admit to his conscious self that the people that are supposed to look after him are the ones abusing him, or
right.
He couldn't survive. So that's betrayal trauma. So that happens when you're young. But I was drugged from a very young age throughout my life, and there's all sorts of drugs available that put you in different states. But all of them make you forget the event. It's just like the date rape drug.
Yeah.
Which that drug also is probably much, much more prevalent than people even imagine. Because it's very easy to drug somebody who's having some drinks. And of course, I drank beer with people that drugged me, like my family of origin, and people that, I pursued recreational events with. So it's pretty easy to drug you, and you just don't remember. You have no recollection that anything happened at all until you learn to retrieve the body memories. And I confronted all those people, and I've sent hundreds of letters to those perpetrators, to the Premier. I've asked the Premier to organize a ritual abuse task force to investigate the crimes committed against me. And it's amazing, out of all the letters I've sent at least 500 letters or emails to perpetrators, and only 5 have called me. These are all people I knew. Only 5 of them have called me to deny what I said in the letter. And then I would always say to them, well, if you didn't do anything, you have nothing to be worried about. But then I would send them future letters, and they didn't call me back, or they didn't call the police. Most of the letters I sent were not reported to the police until just recently, when I believe the cult told them they better start reporting them to the police. Because if you get accusatory letters and you don't report them to the police, what does that say?
That's right. They don't want to have any kind of track record that they could definitely be involved, right?
Yeah.
I would just like to add a piece about
Sure.
the drugging. That firstly, in California, they have coasters in bars so that you can tip your drink and spill a little onto the coaster, and if there's a drug in it, it'll change color. So it is so prevalent that you got coasters to check your drink.
Wow.
The other thing is that some of these drugs that are sexually arousing or memory erasing that people use in order to control others are used as anesthetics in veterinary clinics. And oftentimes when people break into veterinary clinics, it's to steal that type of drug. So, there are those considerations.
Now, when Dave originally came to you, what was the first kind of method and just to kind of take people through how you would address somebody that's coming to you? And Dave, you didn't really know all of the things that were going on. You just knew something was going on, right?
I didn't know anything was going on. I just knew that I wasn't treating. What actually happened was my wife watched Oprah, and there was a lady on there who wrote the book called The Verbally Abusive Relationship. And my wife, after watching that show, said, "Dave, you verbally abuse me." I bought the book and read it within 2 days, and I had to concede to myself that yes, I do. And that wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be or thought I was. So that's when we went to see Sandra. And that's all I knew, is that I knew that I had anger my whole life and didn't know why. I just thought that I did, and that's it. I didn't have any reason why I was angry. I didn't know.
So then that was the starting point, and
Yes.
then from there, Sandra, you just go through the normal
Well,
procedure of
what happened was also that for whatever reason, your wife had a sense that she did not want to go to special occasions with your family. She did not know why.
My wife had traumatic stress syndrome about any family events that we were to go to. Her body would react in a way. If I even mentioned the name of my family of origin, her body would stiffen up and her state would change, and our conversation would go to a bad place quickly because she was triggered. Something inside of her, and she didn't even know why that was.
So she hadn't had any conscious experience like that, or any other reason to
No.
feel that way.
So when a couple comes in, you do all the usual things. What's your problem? Okay, is it this particular thing? Well, here are the steps to go through. And people aren't stupid. They're doing the best they can with what they have. And if you say to them, you give them specific steps on how to deal with anger or dietary things or interventions and so on, and it doesn't change, you have to keep using deeper and deeper methods in order to find out where the problem really is. And in Dave's case, the superficial stuff didn't work, and Dave's a smart guy. So there was obviously something, like the symptom won't disappear until you get to the point of cause. And so we did, the usual introduction to marital stuff, the Enneagram, then energy work. None of that was working with him. So then we started doing the self-hypnosis, which I really like your term. It's a misnomer because we do something a bit different from self-hypnosis. But Dave started accessing it. And when he got to that memory he spoke about where he was told to kill the small animals, and, as far as he was concerned, this person who was teaching him to do this was a great person, and he loved him a great deal. And I kept saying, well, Dave, what kind of person would teach a small child how to hurt or kill a little animal? That isn't a good thing to do. Oh, but, they're such a great person, and I love them. And, you've got to play it back and forth for a while until they get the idea this is not a good person, that the perception you had of them was probably more like something from the Stockholm Syndrome than it was real love. And to get them beyond that point to an objective place where they can evaluate it. So, and Dave, I must say, Dave has been magnificent, and in terms of how hard he has worked to really free himself. He's done an amazing job. And now he's working to free others. And, I'm very grateful for this opportunity so that we can help one another in terms of bringing truth into this world.
Yeah, this conversation I feel is very important. I want to let everybody know right now, I don't feel any kind of negativity or fear. I feel actually hope. I feel like we're addressing that these issues and these traumas. And Dave, I was speaking to you privately, and you were just mentioning how you've gone through this process of dealing with this incredible trauma that you've experienced through your life, and I commend your bravery in coming forward on this. But do you feel now that you've found some semblance of hope and answers and whatever it was that you were seeking for? Do you feel like you've bettered yourself as an individual by going on this journey?
Well, I've removed the anger. I've come to the conclusion that I had a great spiritual growth during my healing, which, of course, healing and spiritual growth are one and the same thing. It's about removing blocks to God's love that's within us and our own essence, which is the same thing. So I've done a lot of that. I came to forgive all those that did these acts. I forgave my family of origin, and I forgave each and every person for each and every act. Because otherwise I would be in a state of hate and thoughts of revenge, and I didn't want to be that kind of leader for my family. And through my spiritual growth, I learned that those people that do those things are doing the best they can. That's where they are presently spiritually evolved. That's the present location of their involvement at this time, and they can't do any better than that. So, if I was able to help them, I would, but I think shining the light of truth on Satanism will help them and help all the other people who are unaware of it. Because it's very important to know that the Satanists I know are pedophiles, and we need to protect the children. And that is what I think maybe that's one of the biggest things that drives me forward and plus the fact I have one son, my oldest son, suffers from mental illness as a result of what happened to him as a child, which I believe was just direct revenge against me because I didn't become part of the cult.
So the same, your family and this cult group got a hold of him as well.
Well, my parents had access to my kids, and yes, so they had access to all my kids.
And just where's he at now? Or do you feel like is he also working with you?
No, Satanism, one of the things, they try and take all your attributes away, God-given attributes, and put in darkness. And, the biggest thing to try and put in you is fear. And so mental illness is about fear. And so he hasn't yet come to a place where he can face what happened to him, I guess. So he's not doing that. He's not doing really well right now.
They mind controlled him to the point where Dave was the bad guy and the perpetrators were the good guys. And he didn't want to see me because I thought his dad was a good guy.
Well, Satanism also, in my case, was about trying to drive our family apart. So they can devise events where they hurt your children and you're there in a drug state. I have many memories of being in a drug state with a silly grin on my face, and while your kids are being hurt right in front of you, and you're drugged and you can't move, and so your kids think that you're part of it, and so that's in their subconscious because they forget those memories when they become when the event's over. But it's in their subconscious, so they have anger at me. And then they do stuff the other way, where I'm angry at some of them. So that was happened between my wife and I, and between two of my sons and I, that we've had to work through. And so there's a lot there. Well, 53 years is a long time, but...
And now I think you're doing the best thing and just coming forward with trying to help expose all of this, because hopefully that'll also help your son and the other people you care about that
That's,
experiencing.
yes, I hope that. And this isn't just the first time I've come forward. I've released YouTube videos as far back as 2012. And I've written many letters to the Premier and to the OPP trying to get them to look at my case.
Any response from them at all?
Well, there's the last time I talked to the OPP detective that looks after my case, he said he didn't believe in cults and didn't believe in any of the things that happened to me. So the Premier, though I've written many, probably 20 or so well-written, very respectful letters to her beginning March 23rd, 2015. She has not responded to even one of those letters yet.
Wow.
It's
And you never know where, if you're getting someone within that system that is just ignorant of it and wants to remain that way, or if because of the tie-ins at the higher levels, if there is an oversight there, or sort of a control mechanism within the higher levels within the police department, the legal system, as you were referencing. It kind of reminds me of the movie Batman, one of the newer movies, where he has this scene where he's got all this anger because of what happens to his parents, and then he goes and he gets shown the underground, and the underground is where all the criminals are, and he goes to the big criminal boss and he wants to try to tell him off, and he sits around and the guy looks at him and goes, look that guy over there, that's the judge, that's the police commissioner, that's the doctor, what are you going to do? What are you going to do in this place? And it was a scene that kind of spoke to a reality that's there, that, when you're dealing with this level of criminality, this isn't just some wacko cult of a bunch of small little group of people that are insane. These are it seems to be that they're very smart, they're very intellectually brilliant at what they do. It's horrific, it's evil, but there's so many layers to that we forget. This is something that is there's a much bigger picture that's going on behind the scenes.
And this underground thing isn't just a metaphor.
Right.
There literally are tunnels in under many, if not most, major cities.
That's right.
We have some here in Aurelia. I know that under Denver, Colorado, there's supposed to be a whole network. There's some
the airport there.
Yeah.
The symbolism there will tell the whole
I've
story.
heard about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
let's get Fran involved in this conversation.
I would just like to say, you brought up something about the cults being very widespread and highly intelligent. And I'd just like to say, I always thought that people who are intelligent must have a high morality. But that is not so. Intelligence is a different scale than consciousness, like the consciousness of who we are truly as human beings. So yes, they're very intelligent, but their level of consciousness is very low.
That's a really good point. Actually, the best example for people is atomic weaponry. If you think about it, it takes a lot of, intellectual brilliance to create that and split the atom and make that. And you have the Manhattan Project. That takes a lot of scientific knowledge and intelligence, but it's not used for the force of good in any way. And it's this is something that is, in my opinion, opposite to life and evil and everything else. And we've gone down this road in so many cases. You brought up Operation Paperclip, the Nazi history. They couldn't have done what they did to Germany and sort of that mass control over the population and what they accomplished if they were idiots. Even though they're evil, they're not to be taken for fools. And so I think that's a calling to us on the good side, so to speak, where we have to become intelligent ourselves. We have to become aware of these things. We have to become a bit more street smart in our approach. And when you do that in combination with enhancing your spiritual nature, as you were referencing, baby, and really connecting to who you really are and that divine spark, whatever you want to term it as, when you combine those two forces, I believe you are in a more advantageous position. And they need to work 24/7, this oppositional side, to keep people in a suppressed state where they can't discover their own power. And they can use that power in a negative sense. And this is what I've seen speaking to other people and just researching this. But Fran, I'd really like to get a little bit more details from you, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about your background and your story, whatever you feel comfortable talking about.
Okay, I would like to start by saying what happened when I got into this, because it's miraculous to know how spirit or levels are working on our behalf, and I think it's really important to know that. So when I was between grade 6 and grade 7, I started to have memories of very violent, perverted things happening to me. And I didn't call those anything, I had to keep reliving them. And that went on for about 30 years. And it was, very violent and perverted. And one of the reasons that I kept returning to those was because there was a kid who helped me in those. And in the course of the therapy, I re-met that person. Talk about spirit putting things together. And that in itself has been a miraculous journey. Now, one of the things that I seemed through therapy, like Dave talks about removing the blocks to who we truly are. As my blocks have been removed, the gifts come out. And one of the ways that gifts are manifested through me is that I can see or hear or notice esoteric, energetic mechanisms that have been used to block our energy fields, to block us from who we really are, from each other. Often the people you're supposed to be working with are the people you've been most blocked against for obvious reasons. So I don't know how many, maybe hundreds of devices and mechanisms have been shared with Sandra, and using the muscle testing technique, we've been able to figure out how you remedy them. You must name them, you must know what they're called, and the solutions for each of them are so different. There's no one solution that works for everything. It's dependent upon how they were put into you. So it's been a miraculous.
And just to be clear on that, Fran's referring to satanic mechanisms that the cult will use on or inflict upon you, that you have to remove and that's one of the blocks that's within you.
This could almost be viewed, I guess, in a basic way as thinking of it almost like a spell of some kind, or just using that terminology, right? Like,
there is spells, curses, and
Oaths, entanglements, like
using
dozens and dozens
and
of things. Symbols on your body. Yeah.
One of the things that we realized was, and Fran and Dave have been invaluable for me in terms of being willing to explore their therapy beyond the point of having cured the original problem of what made them present themselves here. And one of the things that we came across was that there was, at some point, like, I have a gift of being able to see some things as well. And we were working, and there was, instead of having the chakra, the heart chakra, be like a trumpet here and a trumpet at the back with the tube in the middle, the trumpet was at the front, but at the back there was like a hook and no trumpet. And I'm like, where's that going? And there was like a bungee cord where the rest of the chakra was held in the void. And so the person that experienced this could not access their own heart feelings because they were being controlled from that dark place. And so we had to devise a healing method in order to release that from that place. And it's just been one thing after the next of working out energetic solutions for energetic problems.
And I guess you're triggering within them the ability, like their own ability to release that. It's ultimately the person that's suffering from that has to let that go or bring it back to equilibrium, right?
There's an entrainment. Like if you have a certain frequency, for example, then if people are with you, their energy field entrains to yours, so that as they're sitting doing therapy, their level of consciousness is rising and they're more readily able to access their own inner self and deal with themselves and what's wrong with them. So both Fran and Dave have done an amazing job in working out their own issues. They do tons of extra work, so it's just been wonderful for me.
That's incredible. Fran, did you feel like feel free to comment, but I wanted to also find out if there was any actual experiences that you've had or continue to have or had in the past that you can share with people to give an idea of sort of what you've been going through and what you see, what you're involved with.
Before I answer that, I would like to just go back in the conversation a little bit and say that something that Sandra has pointed out is that the overt, violent, perverted acts, the horrific acts of Satanism that we see, they're almost a screen for what is truly going on, which is influencing the energetic level, contest for who owns our soul. And perhaps Sandra can quote it better, but it's the part in the Bible that says, we fight not. You say it.
We fight not against principalities and powers, but against
I think it's we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
Yeah. That's right. I've quoted that for 40 years. Now. We fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and evil in high places. And as I've done this work, that has just become so much more clear. That, clearing of the glass of perception, it's just become so much more clear.
Absolutely, and also when you kind of add in what they're discovering now in modern quantum physics, and there are brilliant scientists that have come forward, and they've had to come out of their own suppressed box too to speak out about this, but they're referencing really what a lot of the ancients literature and,
Absolutely.
and writings and knowledge we're bringing forward, which is that there are multiple layers to this reality. There are multiple dimensional layers to this reality. It's not just this 3D physical realm, although that plays an important part, but it's just there's the world of cause and there's the world of effect. And sometimes, in our modern world, we're so focused on the effect, we forget about what's happening on the energetic level. So I agree completely with what you're saying, that this isn't just one guy or one person doing ill to another person. This is a bigger energetic struggle that's going on.
Yes.
And it's important to bring that in mind.
Yes. And my experience of dealing with the blocks, I've learned from Sandra and some of her other clients about, don't wait. A block or a crisis is an opportunity to uncover your light. And so you deal with one block, get it done, get it out of the way, do it. And then the next one will rise up and you get that out of the way, and soon you're lighter. And in the last year and a half that I've been working intensely, I've changed quite a bit in terms of my energy, my hopefulness, the way I present myself. I've lost weight. I'm more active out in the beautiful environment. I am a different person, and I'm coming into my power. Now, some of the things that I'm discovering that I've been involved in would be the Satanic cult, but there has also been some of a very technological nature, like MK Ultra, and perhaps even beyond MK Ultra with some, with lizards,
Yeah,
with lizards,
I'll say
and
it.
yeah.
And just to give some context here, when we first hear about lizards or reptilians or extraterrestrials or spiritual dimensional beings, there's so many terms for it. I want to just state that this is something that is very prevalent and has been reported beyond the level of just being a coincidence with one or two people trying to make up stories. And I just want to give this background while we're talking about this for the listeners, so that I want to encourage people to go ahead and do their own research on these subjects, and to not go at it from a point of fear, but go at it from a point of trying to get to the bottom of this. Because in your field, Sandra, this is just looked at as you said when you first got into this, they just need some more drugs, they need some more therapy, they've just screened memories and created their own illusion. Maybe you could add a little context to your experience with this.
Well, I think first of all, if you look at Genesis 6, depending on the translation, but it says there, the sons of the gods lusted after the daughters of men and lay with them, and from this the Anunnaki were born. There are, in every culture, there are references to dragons and lizards. It's everywhere. There are tribes in Africa. I'm sure you know this from your experience with David Icke and the people you've been interviewed in Africa. The sacred birch bark scrolls of some of the North American native tribes, they talk about how the lizard people came, and the native tribes fled north and west in order to escape them, but they overtook a couple of tribes who became the most aggressive tribes. So there's literature all over the world on this, but we look at it, with our eyes closed. So, and again, when I first heard it, I did not believe it at all. Not at all. I mean, it took me years to accept that part of it. But now I know it's true. And part of the reason for the rituals is that, there are interbreeding programs between the lizards and humans. And I've had clients who have reported that while they were being raped by a priest or somebody, he morphed into a lizard form while the rape was taking place. If the offspring of that rape is a lizard, and they use like small wombs, short gestation period, the child may just get a little chubby, nobody knows there's some kind of fertilization going on, and they give birth to these really strange things, then a lizard born of crossbred parents has the opportunity to morph back and forth between human and lizard form. As weird as this sounds, I've heard this a dozen times from people. And part of the reason for all the torture is to adrenalize the blood. I used to think, why do they spend so much time torturing people? Like, this is really boring. And why don't they just kill them, get it done with, and everybody can go home and watch the hockey game, But the reason they have to torture them is to create adrenaline in the blood, to make the person so afraid that they release all that adrenaline, because they need adrenalized blood to maintain human form. And
so this is about energy ultimately. This
yes.
is a higher form than just the physical elements of this.
Yeah, they need that adrenaline in the blood, and they drink that blood, they can stay human for longer. And I don't know how much of that is reality or not reality. What I know is I've heard it hundreds of times, and these are people paying good money to come to therapy. Why would they sit and make that story up? Why would I lead them into such a ridiculous story that would make me seem less credible? Yeah. I mean, I'm a therapist. I'm a dedicated therapist. I don't want to, not have credibility. But again, I have to go with the client and not the colleague,
That's right. And I can say that you're very intelligent. You know what you're talking about. You've got, you're not crazy. I can feel that. I'm going to say
a letter to that effect.
I'll get you a letter. But I think that there's so much more that we don't understand. And Fran, maybe you have something more to share on that, and what your opinion is at this time on what's going on with that. Like, when we're talking humans and shape-shifting and all of this goes back into ancient myths and legends like you wouldn't believe, but now we're talking about it in the real world here. Was your experience in your mind sort of like more of a dreamlike thing, or was it something that was more of a physical, real-life experience for you?
As Dave said, the experiences that are very traumatic are buried. They're not in conscious memory. And so by using the technique of remembering with your body, those come back. And honestly, some of those have been so strong, when they came, I thought, wow, I remember this. It's like, I don't remember it here, but where has that been hidden for so long? And I would also just say, people, do your work, because it is so, so beneficial. Because when you remove the blocks and you get into higher and higher levels, everything brings you gifts, and then you get more gifts. You get to be more and more of who you really are.
And that's how you feel now at going through this journey at this point, as you were saying, and you feel like you're in that place now where you're creating and you're attracting and you're affecting that positive change. Have you been able to, do you know of any other people in your circles that have been through similar types of experiences as yourself, or do you feel kind of isolated in that way?
Oh no, because of, first of all, being brought together with that first person who was the helper in my early memories, that created a huge energetic synergy of healing. And is it okay to share about group?
Yeah, just no names.
Okay. Yeah. So in addition to individual, I come to group as well. And wouldn't you know it, Spirit has assembled all the people, like other people from my memories. It really is miraculous, and we have a job to do.
And that's to bring forward the truth, ultimately. And
yes.
The truth, like it says, the truth sets us free, right?
Yes.
It's not always as pretty as we want it to be, but it is in the end, because, as we said, we're addressing the problem, we're addressing the trauma, we're cleansing, we're healing,
yes.
And that's clearly with the state of the world. That's what we need. We can't ignore all these wars and all this corruption and all of this criminality that's going on. We can't just ignore it and sweep it under the rug and say it's normal and don't look at it. We have to look at it. It's I think for the strong, we have to get to that place of strength where we can address it and have the courage to face it. And I just want to say that it gives me hope that there are people like you guys who are coming out and that are sharing that with that kind of courage without worrying about what other people's opinion of it is or not. And there are more people like you around the world that are doing this, that are in their way telling their story. We have people coming from the banking world, from the governmental world, from the military, from the police, from the city councils, from every aspect of society coming out and saying, I was here, this happened to me, I'm exposing this, I'm shining a light on that, I'm shining a light on that. And it's just going to, I believe we're in that time where it's just going to keep unraveling. This is the age of revealing, as I believe it is. This is the time when it's going to come out, right?
Well, the other thing is that when we first start into this, we encounter all of the heavy energies, all the darkness, and so on. But as you journey through it and you transcend it, you encounter all the light beings that are also truly there. And so this is the proving place, the testing place, where we have the freedom to make a decision about which path we follow. If somebody wants to follow the dark path, that's their call. But the thing that bothers me is that there is so much deception and so much trickery and mind control that people have this influence before they have an opportunity to take control of their own lives and make up their own minds. We all know what's happening in Haiti and Africa and other places. It's in the open, in Brazil and so on. But if you choose to follow that path, okay, that's your choice. But to take people like Fran and Dave and others that are in that group that I've been running for over 20 years, who have been through this kind of thing, and withdraw that choice before they even have the chance to make it, that's evil. And that's what I want to open up. We're being put to the test and to see, which do we choose? And the Bible says, I put before you life and death. Choose life.
So the choice is always, I think the choice has always been ours. We're here, like you said, to make that choice. This is a training ground. I come from a martial art tradition. I've always called Earth. It's the dojo that tests your will and your grit and your ability, your spirit ultimately. And we have that choice on a moment-to-moment basis as individuals. We have that choice collectively, and what kind of planet do we want to have? What kind of world do we want to raise our kids in? What kind of people are we going to put in positions of leadership? We always have that choice, and it's finding the choice. For me, when I found that all of these negative things I had happening in my life, instead of feeling like a victim to that, instead of feeling like I was powerless and there's all these external things that were causing me all this grief, when I came in and said, hey, I do have a choice. I have a choice here. And that freed me from those experiences. So that was just like almost happening on a moment-to-moment basis for me. It proved it for myself. And now I said, I got to tell people about this. And I realized, there's other people that are seeing this as well. And this is ancient knowledge. There's a whole way of coming to this understanding. So we called our tour company Modern Knowledge. And this is what I'm doing this interview on behalf of. And I like the idea of modern knowledge because we are drawing from the past. We are, living in this modern time. What can we take from the past? What lessons have we learned from the past to bring us to a point of knowledge in the present so that we can affect change for the future? And I see it as being positive. And I've got to stay optimistic. And I'm sure you guys would feel the same. But, it is with that first understanding of the fact that you're being tested. It's okay to make mistakes. You just got to keep making that choice. And when you make the choice, that's when the change is going to happen.
And love yourself through the whole process. Yourself and others. Just say, okay, be gentle with yourself and just keep learning and don't waste time.
Yeah.
Do it now. I'm with Dave and Fran, I know Dave in particular, he is doing this because he wants to make life better for his children and grandchildren. He was brave enough to face whatever came up in order to make life better for his family. And I have no end of respect for that. Because a lot of people quit. They don't They don't care if it makes life better for future generations. You know, if they're afraid now that they're not going to continue that work, jump the hurdle of fear. You know, fear keeps you trapped. When you get past fear, life gets so much more pleasant and easier.
Absolutely.
You know.
Dave, what do you have to say about that?
Well, if you take a little bit of courage and apply faith in God to it, it becomes a pretty powerful force that can accomplish almost anything, I think. And that's what I'm trying to do, because I can't stand the thought that some other children are being subjected to things that I was and my children were without doing anything about it. And so that's why I'm hoping to shine the light of truth and Satanism on what happened to my family, so others can be aware, because, you know, in the days of the Old Testament, they talk about Satanism all the time. Like, there's all kinds of sodomy, Gomorrah, and all these places.
Sacrificing children.
Sacrificing all kinds of things. And today, it would be safer for a person of good heart in those days sometimes than even today, because today, in the days of the Old Testament, the people that believed in Satan were up front about it. Now they hide. They have a facade in front of them. They pretend they're somebody else. So you don't know who the good guys are and the bad guys are. And that's the problem. Yeah. Because they're very good at pretending there's something they're not.
That's right. That's right.
So,
there's that facade that, but you know what? If you think about it, that maybe shows some progress. You know, in the sense that they're being more and more driven underground. They have to be more. You mentioned that in our age we're still controlled and manipulated, but it's much more sophisticated. Well, why is that? It's sophisticated because it's a predator that has to adapt. Because we are growing in our awareness. We are, I think, going on that. It might be a slow one, but we're going on an upward curve of awareness. We now have, we can do interviews like this. I can put it on YouTube or on the internet, and it can reach hundreds of thousands of people. I think even we are realizing how much more connected we are. We're getting more knowledge and insight into things that we didn't have in the past. So as that awareness keeps growing, the perpetrators of this kind of evil, for that's what it is, they have to be driven more underground. And I think maybe we'll get to that point where they're driven off this planet completely.
But they have their purpose here.
That's true.
They're, without beings who did that, we would have no choice.
Be no training ground.
No, be no training ground. These are our worthy opponents, you know? And it's like, thank you for providing this opportunity for us, and if you want to join the light side, here's the opportunity.
Yeah, we've learned our lesson. We want more advanced lessons now. Thank you very much. Let's call it a day.
And I can remember one client that I was sitting with, and it was her first regression. It was like, sit down, close your eyes, and she closed her eyes, and she popped them open a second later, and they were yellow. And I was so shocked. I can't remember if they were the serpent eyes or not, but I was just like, ooh. And then she stuck her tongue out, and I mean, it didn't go down to her navel or something, but it was a really long tongue. And I'm sitting there watching this, and in a voice that she could not have duplicated, she said, I'm going to effing kill you. And I'm like, okay. And, I'm sitting there like starting to feel some fear. And I thought in myself, what I went was, Jesus, I need you now. And this little voice came and said, interview it. And so I did. I said, who are you and what are you doing here? And those kinds of questions. From that day to this, I can't remember what it said other than something to the effect of it was the master of her. It was controlling her. And when it was over, the thing left. And afterwards she said to me, if you had shown any fear, that thing would have jumped across the table and killed you.
Really?
Mm-hmm. But you get things at the other end as well, where I was working with Dave once, and honestly, we find things in sessions, and then Dave and Fran are so wonderful, each goes home and researches it and said, we found this, which I've never heard of, so one time I'm working with Dave, muscle testing, and it's like there's this giant spiritual being, a 2-story high being there. It's like, that's great, 2-story high being, okay, see you're there, who are you? And it said Metatron. And I'm like, that sounds like some kind of transformer to me. Never heard of an angel named Metatron. Well, Dave went home and researched it, and it turns out that Metatron, one of the jobs is to protect children, which is, of course, what Dave wants to do. So that Metatron energy was coming into Dave to help him protect children. You know, these are such wonderful confirmation, you know, that you're on the right path.
Right. Well, I think anybody that's wanting to protect children, protect goodness, protect harmony and peace,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's the path. That's what we need. And you're whatever way you do it, it doesn't matter what angle it is, whether you're taking on Satanism or these dark ritual groups and what's going on with that, or whether you're creating beautiful art or beautiful music that is supporting that, and or writing child's books that are helping them with positive psychology and empowerment. For myself, I work with children in martial arts, and I watch how it changes their level of confidence, their level of awareness. Talk about learning how to read your body and understand energy. There are many tools. And I just think that from this conversation today, I think we can take that whoever's watching this interview, you have something to contribute here as well on whatever level. You are here to perform some kind of a valuable task. And it's not to work 60 hours a week for some boss and to have your taxes taken from you. It's to do, good work, And I know we do this from the goodness of our heart. There's not a lot of financial benefit to it at all. I'm sure you would say in your practice, it would have been detrimental to your career to come out with this. But you said, no, I see something here. I'm going to go with my intuition, my training, the way I see this, bring the evidence out regardless. And we honestly need more people like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if anybody else would like to have any kind of, maybe we'll do a little closing statement. If anybody else has anything to share that you'd like to bring out. Dave, maybe we'll start with you.
We've covered quite a bit.
We've covered a lot. We'll have to do a follow-up.
Yeah.
But if you had anything to say, to encourage people, what would it be?
I don't have anything to say in that regard. What I'm trying to do is have my case become public, because I have a list of over 300 people who have committed crimes against me, and I believe if that's brought forward, it will create awareness in Canada, at least, for people to take a second look at why they are angry, why they are mentally ill, why they have addictions or eating dysfunctions or those types of things. And will also encourage them to be a little even more watchful with their own children. If you Google the report of the Ritual Abuse Task Force in California, it talks about that 100 preschools were implicated as procuring children for cult abuse. And then it goes on further to say that these daycare centers were initiated solely for the purpose of procuring these children. That's a pretty scary statement when you think about it. And of course, it's no different in Ontario than it would be in California, I'm sure. So we need to be much more aware. Child pornography is a multi-million-dollar industry, which must mean there's a million pedophiles, because who else would watch that?
That's right.
And if there's millions of pedophiles, how many do we catch? You read the isolated case here and there, but
they're feeling us up at the airports like to no end and trying to get us because we're all terrorists suspected or whatever. But here we've got some of the most incredibly dark, filthy criminals running around in our midst that we can't even imagine. Right? So that bringing that awareness to it, I think that's really, really the solution. It's been sort of the focus of this. And I appreciate that, Dave. Appreciate what you're doing. Fran, did you have anything that you wanted to sort of close with?
For some reason, the movie The Matrix has been coming to my mind now, and for me The Matrix was a really great metaphor for waking up to the illusion that we've been kept in, and waking into your true power. And what an amazing journey.
Absolutely. And that's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things is that there's choice, again, implicated here. It was like when that Morpheus says to the Neo character, he's like, I can really only show you the door. You're the one that's going to have to walk through it. This is sort of an entry into becoming that. It's like adulthood almost. To our own initiation process of coming into our own and recognizing our potential. So it's a great metaphor, and I definitely agree with that. Sandra, was there anything you wanted to close with here today?
Sure. I mean, in other cultures, they have initiations at a certain age to overcome fear, and to get a hold of who you truly are. And in our culture, we don't have those kinds of initiations. And I think therapy well done, A, is a truly political act, and B, teaches you to overcome that fear and to become who you truly are. And I always say to clients, you know what, you are perfect. You are perfect. You've just got all these layers on top that you need to get rid of. And as you clear the layers, that perfection comes out, and you're so much more at peace with yourself, so much more joy, so much more love, as I keep saying. And why would anybody wait a moment to access that? The fear is an illusion, and respect yourself, get beyond that fear, and do what you were meant to do in this life. Show the example, and I do believe at some point we're going to reach a critical mass where the whole thing is going to tip into that way of being, and we're going to support one another into that way of being.
Well, it's just beautiful, and I couldn't agree more. And I grew up with my own fear paradigm that I had to deal with from a young age, had my own traumatic events in my life, and going on that journey of being in an extreme place of being disempowered, feeling like a victim, stuck in a prison of fear, to what I feel I've reached today. I kind of feel like saying, if I can do it,
Amen.
anybody can do it. And if you guys can do it, anybody can do it. And Sandra, the work that you do in bringing the psychological aspect to it and giving people the freedom to really express what they really want to say without having it edited, without having assumptions made, without creating context for them, that's just, it's remarkable. And I really appreciate this interview, taking the time with me today, and Dave and Fran as well for joining in. And I definitely think we should do a follow-up in the future and
Hope so.
support each other as we move forward.
I would say that deserves a big high five.
High fives all around. Awesome.